What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 45 of the Steam Deck Podcast, Flip Screen Games' weekly video game podcast, all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Max Wright.
Ahoy, ahoy.
Ahoy, ahoy, Max. It is full steam ahead this week because, of course, it is the Steam Next Fest. And we are here to talk. We're going to just jump into it because we got a show ahead of you,
Absolutely.
gang. Okay, we're going to start things off with a write-in from our very own co-host, wherever he is out in the ether. Hopefully he'll be back for next week, right?
Name
Steve,
him. Did you say? Okay, you go. Good. I thought he was going to go in without saying his name, like he didn't really exist. Carry on.
No, don't worry. Steve, the finest mind in the Steam Deck community, Mr. Steven Radford, wrote in and said, "What should we be playing from Steam Next Fest, and why is it Moonstone Island and House Flipper 2?" So I wanted to use Steve's question as a jumping off point, Max, because I know you and I both jumped into several demos as part of Steam Next Fest this week, and we've got some games we're excited to talk about, and we've got some games we're not as excited to talk about. So
yeah,
I figured we could kind of, we'll go a little round robin, back and forth. We can each talk about games that we tried out. But I'll start off with Moonstone Island since Steve asked about it. I haven't gotten to play House Flipper 2. That's more of a Steve joint than a Pete joint, so he'll have to talk about that one later on. But Moonstone Island is very much up my alley. The way that Steve described it in the Discord, I think boils it down pretty well, which is that it's more or less Stardew Valley meets Pokemon.
Good to me.
But it also does have, I think, kind of the added wrinkle of being a deck builder as well. Like the way that the monsters that you do use in battle like actually fight is based on like deck building, and as you level them up, you'll unlock new cards that like give them different abilities, and you can kind of customize the way that they play in your deck, as it were. But yeah, I mean it's that kind of experience mixed with the farming and everything that you would know from a Stardew Valley, but then there's also like some dungeoneering and like survival and that kind of element to it. So it's got a lot going on. But I think from what I played anyway, right? Like the initial demo, I got about halfway through it. So I think I was about 5 or 6 in-game days. I think it tops out at 2 weeks in-game. I'm already really enjoying it. Yeah. Like I feel like the systems that are there are like they're working well in harmony with each other. Like I can see the loop, right? Of like you're going out, you're collecting resources, you're getting in battles, you're leveling up your monsters, and then you're also like finding new monsters that you can add to your crew and everything. And then, like, as the game goes on, from some of the stuff we've seen in the trailers and everything, you get to a point where it's like, all right, like I'm in a town, like there's like social sim elements. You can like there's like these like dialogue interactions where you can like flirt, or you can try to be friendly, or you can do this or that. So it's definitely like bringing a lot of kind of disparate elements of types of games that I really vibe with and respond to, and like bringing them all kind of in that same loop. And I think it really speaks to me in the same way that Persona 5 does, where it's like each of the systems individually is good and fun to engage with, but I think having all of them there really satisfies the type of player that I am, where I do kind of want a little variety, but none of the systems are like separate from each other. It does a pretty good job, I think, of like doing the thing I liked about Cult of the Lamb, of like each system really cleanly feeding into the other systems, right? Yeah. Because the stuff that you're farming, like you use that in combat, right? You use that for your own health, you use that for your monster's health. So it's like, sure, there's like the economy growing aspect of running the farm, but it also has a deeper impact on the gameplay beyond that, which is something I really appreciate for sure.
What worried me about not necessarily Steve's descriptions, where I then started looking into more of it, and sort of even the things you've just said there as well, that it sounds like it's one of those games that it's a bit of this, bit of that, bit of this, bit of that, bit of this thrown in.
Yeah.
Is it? Do you think there's a possibility that it might feel too bloated when you're okay, cool. Like it's not the best version of Stardew Valley. It's not the best version of Pokemon. It's like, when you go to like an all you can eat buffet, like a world
Yes.
buffet, and it's like they don't do anything great, but they do lots of it. Do you think that
Yeah.
there's a worry that this is going to be the case?
That was my worry prior to getting hands on with it, but like getting to spend like, like an hour with it or whatever it was that I was playing, like I could see the loop, and I think to me that's always the deciding factor whether games like that work is
Mhm.
like, do you like all of the systems alone, and then do they meaningfully feed into one another? Do they build on one another in a way that makes that experience overall more satisfying? And granted, what I've played is a sliver, right, of what there is to be played, and it's obviously not the final product, but
Mhm.
it feels like it's going in the right direction for me. Like as somebody who I think is kind of increasingly really starting to feel burnt out by this genre, and like I'm tired of seeing it and seeing new
Yeah.
people try to do, here's our version of Stardew Valley, or here's our version of Stardew Valley, but also there's another gimmick.
Yeah.
This to me feels like one of the ones where it's like, okay, like this is onto something. And I think the combat system I actually really like a lot as well, because I think a lot of the we've talked about this on this show specifically before, of like, will there ever be a point where Pokemon gets Stardew Valley'd, right? Because it doesn't innovate, it doesn't evolve, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think it will. I don't think it can, right? And I think a big problem
have
with
tried.
that is, what's that?
People have tried, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Cassette Beast, Temtem, like these games that
Koromon.
have come out. Yeah.
And
I
it's
don't
like,
think that any of them have hit in the same way that Pokemon do, I think.
yeah, right. And it's like, not to say that makes those bad games. Like,
No, absolutely not.
it's fine to be the indie darling version of that thing if that's what you're going for. But there is, I think, kind of the benefit with this game in that, like, what it's trying to do is not exactly Pokemon. Like having the card-based system, like having a combat system that is like reminiscent of Pokemon, and that it's like a creature collector and there's types and all those things. Cool, but it's trying to do its own thing rather than just be like, we're gonna do our own version of this, right? And I think that's really to its benefit as well. So I think between the fact that it has that angle, which is unique and really good, I think that this game will be able to like find an audience, I hope anyway, and like stick out among the crowd of this type of game.
Okay, I think maybe it's people describing it that way that makes it sound like that, as opposed to what the developers are going for. Like if you go in, if you say, "Oh, have you heard of this game?" They're like, "Oh no, what's it like?" Instead of saying, "Oh, well, you go out crafting, you collect these things, you get monsters." People going, "Oh, it's like Stardew Valley and Pokemon and blah blah." You might start to think that what are you doing, Pete?
You keep going. I had to kill a bug. Sorry.
Okay, fine. You might start to think, oh, they're just crossing these things over as opposed to creating something new. So, I think if I was to describe this to someone, I would probably try and describe it based on what it is, not what it seems to be, what I believe it's trying to be.
Yeah, and I think that's like a tough thing with indie games, right? Is like, the more innovative you are, the tougher it is to market your game. So I think there is like a desire to kind of boil things down and try to be like, oh, it's like this, it's like that, it's this, like this other thing that you already know. And yeah, like maybe that is doing it a disservice. So, I don't know. I think this is one that I would recommend if how I've talked about it is at all appealing to you, or if you are a fan of the Stardew Valley style game or whatever, but you want something that's different, or if you're a fan of Pokemon, but you want to try something that's like kind of outside of that wheelhouse, I would definitely go and kick the tires on it for yourself and see if this speaks to you in the way that it spoke to me, because I'll say of the games that I tried for Steam Next Fest, this was my favorite.
Okay, that's good.
And I liked a lot of the other games I played. So I think that speaks highly of where it's at right now for, a demo.
Well, maybe if I can give this to go before Next Fest is over, we can discuss it with Steve next week, because he seems pretty into it. So,
yeah, I'd love to.
Cool. Shall I talk about the first game I played then?
Yeah, go for it.
So the first game that technically it was the second game I played, but it's the first I'm going to talk about for a reason we'll get to in a minute. I played Viewfinder, which is a game that I discovered a couple of weeks ago just by watching I think it was just a GIF on Twitter I saw, and I was like, this is interesting. Start looking more into it, and I don't know, you might have seen it. It's where the general premise of it, I guess, is that you have a picture in your hand, and photograph where you find them around the world, and you're on like a floating, I don't know, it could be a platform, part of a house, whatever. If you hold that photo up, and you can rotate it, or you can sort of angle it the right way, and then you press the right trigger, the photo just appears in real life. And similar to what's the one, Superliminal, where your perspective matters. The perspective where the photo is affects how that appears in real life. So let's say, for example, there's no way across to this section. There's a photo of a bridge. I can line the photo of the bridge up so the two ends touch. I put the photo in place, and then the picture sort of like superimposes itself on the world, but the bits that are 3D, the main focus is, so the bridge is there physically, and then off in the background now is the sort of warped remains of the background of the photo, basically. So it starts off like that, where you're just like, okay, cool, I've got this photo. If I put it here, cool, I can now walk across this platform, or I can go into this world. Then it starts to sort of add a few more things, like, if I go into this world, there's a photograph, but that photograph is just a photograph of this photo. It's a copy of the photograph I've already got, and then you place it down again, and it's like, again, this is the same photograph I've already had, but there's actually an island quite far away, and what you have to do is sort of string them together to make this long platform to get across. And it does feel quite simple with some of these puzzles, but then it starts to ramp up a little bit more when the art styles come in. There's a bit quite sort of towards the end of the demo, I guess, which is still quite early in the game, where you're living like a memory, like the main character's like hearing a memory of I think it's his mother talking to him, and she's talking about like, oh, do you remember when you drew this, or oh, do you remember when you painted this, or do you remember when you took this photograph, blah blah blah, and you sort of string them together. So
okay, that's interesting.
So you like pick up this photograph, place it down, go into the world, and in there's another memory, and in there is a painting you've drawn as a child. You paste that down, you walk into the painting world, and then the world becomes watercolor around you when you're in that section. And in this watercolor world, you find a picture you drew as a child, and you place that down, and you go in, and it's all like a white background, and everything's drawn out of crayons, and you still open the door and interact with stuff. You go through, and in there's like a picture of a video game. You go in there, and then like the graphics become quite like pixelated, and then you you sort of go into these things. So I can see there being a lot of that in it, in terms of like, it's not just this one thing, which I was quite worried it was going to be quite one note of like, okay, I placed the picture, I walk through, but to have different options, and maybe the rules change or something, because there was one where it was like you go into like a cartoon, sort of like Wile E. Coyote style like cartoon, and your steps then sound more like ding 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 ding, like a Looney Tunes character would, So I do wonder if there's like physics changes and things like that. Yeah, I quite enjoyed it. There's then like a skip. So at the end of like the first section of the demo, it skips through a bunch of content and gives you like a snippet of later in the game, which is where like things got a bit more challenging for me, where it was like, okay, there was a teleporter to the next level that needed powering with 2 batteries, but that was behind a fence, and there was 1 battery too high up for me to reach. And I was also introduced to the camera. I was given a camera, and I can take the photos that I then place. Instead of just finding photos around the world, you can take your own photos, place them wherever, and sort of change the world. So then it becomes less of a going through the motions. Okay, what am I supposed to do here? And cool, how can I interact with the world, and how can I make meaningful changes by using this camera that I've got? And you only have a limited
That's
number
like almost
of
like
shots.
Portal.
Yeah, it very much feels like Portal, Superliminal, like all those kind of games where it's like, you're going through level by level solving puzzles. But I think it's interesting because Portal, what makes Portal great isn't necessarily the Portal mechanic, while that is good. It's the wrapper it's in. It's wrapped in this laboratory experiment, with GLaDOS and all this stuff that really makes Portal stand out. It has like a great identity to it, as well as just being, good physics puzzles.
Sure.
Whereas this, I feel like, from what I played in the demo, doesn't have our strong identity. There's a woman talking to you, and I didn't think much of her voice. It was like a British voice. She sort of sounded like Jenna Coleman, who she was in Doctor Who and Xenoblade Chronicles, but I don't think it was her. But I didn't think much of her. I didn't think much of her, like what she was saying to you, and it was sort of quite millennial, where she's like, "Yo, no way!" when you do something, and I was like, I don't know about this. She sort of disappears towards like later on as you sort of meet this grandma character who's on the gramophones and stuff. But yeah, I'm really interested in this, and it's definitely one I'm going to pick up at some point, whether it's on release or after. I quite like Superliminal, even though it was a bit too obtuse for me. Massive fan of Portal. There's a couple other games I want to play in a similar sort of style, like Quantum. I can't remember what it's called.
Quantum Break?
No,
No, that's something
no.
else. That's
That is a game, but this one's more of like a Quantum Conundrum. That's what this one's called. It was like
gotcha.
it was from I think it was from one of the people that made Portal, went on to make Quantum Conundrum, if I remember rightly. So I've always wanted to play that one, but yeah, it's that kind of game, you know.
It's got a really cool style to it for sure. I not
Yeah.
necessarily like my kind of thing. The like environmental puzzlers are not usually my bag,
Mhm.
but I really like the idea of like using like photographs and like kind of like combining art styles and having that
Mhm.
kind of like surrealist approach, you know, and that it like
Yeah.
is connected to like a narrative about like memory and all. Like that's really cool. Like
Mhm.
that's bringing a lot of interesting
The
things together.
I think as a demo, it does a great job of, really eases you in, which I guess is like how the start of the game would ease you in, and then to skip a large chunk of the game and just give you a one level of later in the game to give you an idea of, oh, okay, it's not just this. There's going to be more to it. Makes me
Yeah.
want to then find out what else there is and see how these things interact. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one coming out actually. And this is like you said, Moonstone Alarm was your favorite of the. I only played 2 of the games. This was my favorite, and really looking forward to this one.
Nice. So the next one that I want to shout out is a game that I was very pleased to see because I didn't realize that this game was in development. I guess it had been announced just a couple months ago that it was in active development, and it's Punch Club 2. So if you're not familiar with the original, Punch Club was a game by Lazy Bear Games and was published by Tiny Build, and it is a management sim basically for like a boxer in like a Rocky style like 80s kind of world. And there was like this whole like story with like your father being this like like he was a great boxer and he disappeared, and like there's this whole like very like standard like boxing movie type narrative to it. And it was one of those indie games that like I played years ago. I really enjoyed it. It struck a chord with me. It was like a really fun, unique management sim. And
Oh, it's a match. So it's in like Football Manager kind of thing, or like where you're not actually fighting. You're training the guy up. You're giving him
it's
stats and stuff,
it's
and you let him
both.
go.
So like
Okay.
you do management during like the day, right? Like you have time to spend where it's like you train, right? Like you build up your strength. You need to feed your guy. You need to make money. You need to do whatever. And then in the actual like fights, you do like it's kind of like a deck building thing where like you pick attacks and then
Mm.
you like let the fight play out, and it's like you're kind of making adjustments as you go. Um, so yeah, it's like a management sim mixed with like a deck building, like turn based kind of game. Um, and yeah, like I said, I was a really big fan of the original, and it's like one of those indie games that like I feel like never really got a lot of play, but like I really liked it, and it's one that I always go back to when I think of like indie games that are kind of like hidden gems that I really appreciate. So seeing that there is a sequel in development and that it looks like it's kind of just a bigger, better version of what we got last time, is definitely something that I'm interested in and looking forward to getting my hands on the sticks again, because the demo was definitely fun. I didn't get too far into the demo because it very much became clear, like, okay, this is a sequel to a game I know and love well.
Yeah.
So I'm in. Like I'm ready to pick this one up when it comes out. So
Sure.
I wanted to just kind of give a shout out to it because it's a game that again, like I really love the first one, but I've not heard many other people talk about it.
I've never heard of it, and I feel like sometimes I am pretty like on the wire with indie games, like, but
Yeah.
apparently not.
This,
Apparently
this
not.
there's this game and Party Hard are two games I always think of like these are indie games I love that like no one else has played. And I think
Party
they're both
hard.
really delightful. So
Then
I
no
I
party
would
hard.
definitely, if you're into management sims like Steve and I would definitely put your eyes on this one because it's very different. Like I like that it's the classic management sim style gameplay, but rather than like running a business or whatever, like it does have like a more personal narrative, and it's funny. Like it's very goofy, like tongue in cheek kind of like humor, and it's a good time. I think it's worth everybody giving it a shot. And this one feels like they're really upping the weird ante a lot, and the first one was already kind of weird. So this has like a whole like weird cyberpunk like
Yeah, I thought it looked sort of like the Blood Dragon version of the first
yeah.
game because I looked them both up when you mentioned it. And yeah,
Yeah,
this has got like that
I'm pretty sure
vaporwave.
that the game is implying that the original game was all like your character in this game like playing a video game, and
Brilliant. Okay, so
like
it's just levels
like it
on
was all a
levels.
dream type thing, and it's like, oh shit, okay, like
Time to do it for real.
yeah, now it's like, rather than it being like a fictionalized version of the 80s, it's like the distant future, but it's inspired by the 80s. I don't know. It's got a good vibe. I think it's worth checking out for sure. So I know the next game that is on both of our lists
Yeah. Well,
was
this is my turn. So let me announce it.
before it, bud.
Wizard with a Gun. Now, this is a game that I have seen and heard of before, and it's been on my radar a little bit, not just because of the name, but also just because like it seems like the kind of thing that we would both enjoy. I think we're both sort of guys who like a roguelike. We're sort of there's I'm sure there's games that we've am I got that right? You like a roguelike? You don't mind a roguelike?
I mean, there are definitely roguelikes I've enjoyed. I don't know that I
Mhm.
would say I'm like I wouldn't say I'm like the biggest fan of the genre, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
loved Cult of the Lamb last year, loved
Yeah,
Hades before that, right?
yeah,
But
these
I
sort
think
of things
you're
that
definitely right to say I like a good arcadey action game. That's for sure.
yeah, these are the sort of the sort of things I was conjuring up when sort of imagining what this was. And spoiler for both of us, well, spoiler for me specifically, actually, I don't know about you so far yet. I really didn't get on with this at all.
No, I didn't. I did not think this was
It
good at all.
Yeah, it
I
was
thought it played really poorly.
yeah, it was
I
really
thought
clunky.
yeah, it was very clunky. I thought the controls felt very stiff,
Yeah,
and
the stick didn't make any sense because it was like locking onto things but never wanting to shoot. The combat was
no,
dog shit.
yeah, it like always locked like right like
Yeah, it locked onto a
past
piece of
where I actually
scenery.
wanted it.
Yeah, like I'm trying to
Yes.
shoot something, it's like, oh, there's a bit of scenery between you, so I'm gonna lock onto that instead. Like, no, I don't want to shoot this invincible bit of scenery. I want to shoot this enemy.
Also,
Um,
like I don't know. Did you play this on deck or on PC?
on the deck.
Yeah.
Feels
So
like it would
like
be maybe more of a clicky, mouse and keyboard game,
it would be
maybe.
easier, I think, maybe,
Mhm.
but like it as a like its twin stick controls are just bad. Like I mean, like we
Yeah.
said, right? Like the right stick where you're actually like spinning your view is like very finicky, and that doesn't
Yeah.
work. But also just the mapping of the buttons
Yeah.
doesn't work. Because at least for me it didn't work, right? Because you need to be using using your left hand to steer, you're using your right hand to turn, and then you need to use the face buttons to
To
shoot.
dodge.
So and to
Oh,
dodge.
I had shoot on
Oh no,
the
you're
right
right. You're
trigger.
right. It's
Yeah, yeah,
dodge.
yeah.
It's dodge.
Yeah, yeah.
Shoots on was on the
The
right trigger.
trigger, yeah.
But even
But then you
so,
can
right?
swap to like the book, and you can accidentally do that by hitting. I can't remember what it is you hit to get the book up. You can accidentally get the book out, and then you're like, okay, now I'm just scanning everything. Like, okay, how do I? Or you can accidentally swap to your gun that makes furniture instead of the actual gun you want. It's like, why is that a gun? Why is that in my inventory as a gun that I can use to make a piece of furniture for like crafting things? I don't need that. I need a
Yeah.
gun, right? And the
Well,
gun you get.
it's funny. It sounds like you got further than I did too, because like
Oh, really?
I didn't even get to that. Like I got shortly after you like they take you through here, craft a pistol, and now you got to get into this
Yeah,
dungeon. I was doing that, and I was like, this is not fun. Like I don't want to keep
yeah.
playing this at all.
I did that. I went back into the sort of the tower, and then the tower was like, "Cool, now you need to." It doesn't explain any of its concepts. It was like, now you have to rewind time to be able to leave here. And I was like, "What?" And I went up to this thing with the gears, and it said, "Cool." And then two things lit up, and it was like, "Do you want to rewind time?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know what I'm doing, so yes, rewind time." And I was like, "Okay, nothing has changed. So if maybe I'll just go through the door again." Went through the door again. All of a sudden, I'm in a different place. I was like, "Great!" And there's a timer at the top that counts down, but I have no idea what that is counting down to at all. I had no idea what my objective was. There were objectives in the right hand side, and it was like find gears. And I was like, okay, but what do the gears do? And like, how do I get other guns? So I've got this one gun that's crap, and then I've come up against two enemies at once, and they were smoking me because all I had was this one gun that couldn't aim at anything, two of them are firing at me constantly. I'm trying to hide behind scenery, but if I want to shoot them, I have to move out. And then I'm just getting blasted. I don't know. I don't think it's one of those ones where I'm bad at the game, therefore it's not good. It genuinely just feels like this wasn't fun, or this didn't
Yeah, no, like
work.
it's just not fluid. Like it's,
Yeah,
like I don't know. Like I'm right there with you. Where like I don't think it's a matter of like I suck at this game, so I'm having a bad time with it. It's like I don't think it's not easy to be good at it, right? And like that's not because the game is difficult, it's because I'm fighting the controls. And
yeah,
that's different. Like that's not fun. It's fun to play like it's the difference between something like Celeste, right? Which is like, okay, cool, like this is difficult. The point of this is to get my teeth
yeah,
kicked in a little bit, but like that's what I'm doing, right? Or like Super Meat Boy or something like that, right? Like
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
yeah, like the
Try and
point is
try
to do
again
this.
until you get there. This is like
This
if
is
you
supposed
fail.
to
Sorry.
this should be like Hades, right? Like it should be like
Yeah,
I'm losing because the fight is hard and I'm overwhelmed and I want to try again, not I'm
yeah,
losing because it's clunky and it doesn't control the way I feel like it should. And, like it's just not intuitive. And
yeah,
that's a huge part of like an arcadey action game is like the feel, right? The
yeah.
first
Pick
time
up
you
and play.
play it and get hands on it, you should be like, oh, this is fun. This feels good. I want to play more. And I had the
Yeah,
exact opposite experience. I was
I
like, cool,
was.
I can confidently skip this game.
Yeah, I was digging very hard for um for it to start. I was like, okay, maybe at some point it will click. Maybe at some point something happens. I think I played a good like 35, 40 minutes of it, trying to sort of for it to click, and it was just a slog. And I was trying to read everything I could, but nothing was really explaining what my goal was. And
Mm-mm.
I said, it said, "Do you want to do a tutorial?" I said, "Yes." And then the level I thought I was doing, I thought was the tutorial. I assume you probably did the same thing. But then at
Mhm.
no point did it say, "Cool, tutorial over." And I was like, "Am I still doing the tutorial? Have I finished the tutorial?" I didn't learn anything from the tutorial. All I learned was how to punch trees and blocks, which again also felt awful because I was like pressing the punch button, and at no point did it tell me to aim. So I was stood in front of this block
Oh my god,
punching, and
I did
nothing
the
was
same
hitting.
thing,
And I was
Max.
like, "What's happening?"
I did the same thing where I was like, I actually closed the game and reopened it because I thought it was just the demo glitching that my character wouldn't turn.
Oh
And I
yeah,
was like,
yeah,
oh, it's a twin stick. Okay.
yeah,
Why
yeah.
wouldn't you communicate that to me? You told me how to punch, but not
Yeah, like walk a
how to
punch, not
aim.
walk.
Like,
Look, do look first. Do walk, look, then punch. Yeah, disappointed again. Like I can confidently skip this one too. You're correct on that. It's
yeah,
um, just
doesn't
not
have it.
my not my game at all. And it's a shame really because it is a game that was on my radar. So
Yeah, yeah, me too. And I mean, I guess this year, right? Like anything I can cut off the list is probably good, but it's a shame because I did think it looked really cool and like getting into the character customization, I was like, oh, I really like this style. It's got such a cool vibe, and yeah, just not for me.
yeah,
So, I mean, I honestly, I don't know if I think it's going to struggle to find an audience because it just doesn't feel good. And like, there's so many games in this style that feel great. It's like, why would you play this when you could play like Death's Door or something?
exactly. Or even just Hades. If you're looking for
Sure.
a roguelike adventure, not even just like a
Yeah.
isometric or sort of top-down style adventure, and you just want to play a roguelike, there's so many amazing ones that are packed with content. I would rather go back to Hades after like 60 hours of that and play more of it than play this game.
Yeah. Agreed. Also, Hades 2 is coming, right? So it's
Oh
like,
yeah,
do I
boy.
really need to like just wait, right? Like, just wait for the next really good one. That's my 2 cents anyway. Um, the next game I want to talk about. This is the last game that I got to play, and it really struck a chord with me as well. This one's Eternights, and this is a game that we've talked about a few times on the show, or on these shows. I don't know if we've talked about it on this show, but it is a basically it's like the Stardew Valleyification of like Persona. It's like this very small team. It was originally just one person, and it's a game heavily inspired by the style of Persona 5. It's got a supernatural storyline going on where based on what I saw in the demo anyway, right? There's basically this supernatural event that walls off a portion of the city that you're in, and all these like zombie type monsters basically come out, and people are getting turned into these monsters, and you and the like little crew of characters that you've got around you, all your companions, right, are like trying to get to the bottom of it. and then there is like the social sim element to it, right? Where like it is like a dating sim as well, is like the thing that they always describe it as. So it's definitely more explicitly about the romance angle than I think just like the kind of general like confidant stuff in Persona. Um, this is an interesting one because like when they first, this is a game that I haven't known what to think of it. Like when they first revealed it, I was like, okay, cool. Like I love Persona. The idea of like a game inspired by that is like combining the, um, kind of supernatural JRPG craziness with like slice of life, that kind of thing. I'm like, okay, cool. Like I'm into that. The more we've seen of it, the less confident I've been that it's for me because rather than like turn-based combat, which I really like, it is more of like a hack and slash thing, which can be hit or miss. I thought the combat didn't feel great, but I thought it felt serviceable. It wasn't bad. It just like wasn't exciting. But the dialogue, the voice acting, like the actual story setup and everything, I actually thought was really interesting. I got pretty invested in what was going on pretty quickly, and it like sets up some interesting mysteries and like questions to be answered. Just kind of about like what's going on lore wise, and I found myself to definitely be engaged in that. And I'm a big fan of any game that where a core part of the mechanics are okay, you have companions and you have dialogue choices, and when you make dialogue choices, it influences your social stats or whatever, right? Like, and that's a big part of this is like that kind of confidant style thing where it was like I was in a situation, right, where like you meet a new character and you get injured, right, and like you can either like blame them or you can make a joke about it or you can do this, you can, and like Mike, I was like, oh, I'll make a joke and like play it off, and it was like it increased my charm, right, or my confidence. It's like, oh, okay. You can see how like that'll come into play later on when you're like flirting with the other party members or whatever, and you're trying to like engage with that side of things. So yeah, like it ended up, I think, giving me a clear idea of what the vibe of the game is and like what its tone was like and everything. And it definitely got me to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm definitely gonna play this. I'm excited about it. I want to try it. Rather than being like, oh, I think this is for me, but what are reviews like? Like, let me see what the
Yeah.
reaction is. Now that I've gotten to kind of like, see if it passes the smell test, I'm like, yeah, this is
All right.
definitely for me.
Well, that's good for you because when I looked at this, when I was looking through the next stuff list, I was like immediate skip. There's just something about the way it looks. I didn't even look too deep into it. I just looked at the key art and I was like, nah, you're all right. You're good.
It does have a very like PlayStation 2-y kind of
Yeah.
vibe to like some of the animations. But again, it's a small team, right? So,
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, if it's your kind of game, then that's great. And I'm sure there are going to be, like, there's a lot of Persona fans out
yeah,
there
for sure.
who are desperate for Persona.
Speaking of which, I did want to give a quick shout out to a friend of the show, Snackago, put up a video on his YouTube channel all about the Eternites demo. So if you want to hear another Persona 5 junkie like me break it down, he did share a link to it in our self promo channel over on the Discord. So if you want to go give that one a spin, I'm sure he would appreciate it. So the other game I tried, I know we both tried to get another game in and failed. I tried to play Sticky Business, which is that game that we saw at, I want to say, the Wholesome Direct. And it is a like pixel art style game where like you play an artist and you run like a sticker business, and like you have to like create like designs and sticker sheets, and like it's a business management sim, right? But there's like that creative angle to it as well. And this was one that Steve and I both highlighted in our Summer Game Fest reactions. Like when we were breaking down all the announcements that we were most excited by from those showcases, this was one that I know he was really excited by and I thought looked really good as well. I tried to get the demo and it just was not working on Steam Deck. You would open it and it had like a crashing like graphic and everything. So I think it's not there on Steam Deck yet. So I think that's one. I had the same problem with Moonstone Island, actually. I forgot to mention that. It wouldn't play on deck, but it worked fine on PC. So this is one I'll probably try on my desktop. And, if we do talk about this again next week, I'll report back. But
I'm sure they will have for the full release worked on the Steam Deck. Maybe they just want to get demo
Yeah.
out for now.
Yeah,
But neither of
exactly.
these games were able to work. So I sort of rebooted and updated my Steam Deck. Then I got to be able to get both of the games I played to work. But,
Nice. So then, what was
yeah,
the last game that you were gonna get into but didn't get to?
what I wanted to play first was Lies of P, but because the download was sort of bigger than these two, I thought, okay, I'll do these two first, and just didn't have time before we
Yeah, I had the same
eventually sat down to
problem.
record with real life in the way, and yeah. But it's the one I'm sort of most looking forward to out of all of these, just because it's sort of exactly my style. It's my jam. I'm gonna sort of it's finishing downloading as we speak, although it is kind of destroying the quality of Pete's camera right now. But whatever. So yeah, I'll probably give it a go. Maybe I'll talk about it next week when Steve's on, and we sort of maybe recount a couple of the other games we played. 'Cause I'm sure there'll be more stuff that I'll give a go in the meantime. It'll be good to drop in and
Yeah, there's
to
a couple
put
other
in.
games I would like to get in there and play around with as
Yeah,
well. Like there
definitely.
was that I forget the name of it, but I downloaded it. It was that game that we saw at the Nintendo Direct yesterday. That was like the Saturday morning cartoon style
Oh yeah, I
Myth
can't remember.
Force.
Myth
Myth
Force.
Force. That
Yeah,
was another one that I
Aspire, right? That publishing that, I think.
yeah, I think it is. That was another one that I want to give a shot to, and I would like to play more of Moonstone Island because I have a couple
Sure.
in-game days left. So, yeah, we'll see how we get on. If we have time to get to it next week,
Yeah.
hopefully we'll talk about some more games that we were able to try out. But
I would also
definitely,
like to. I
oh, go for it.
was gonna say I'd also like to know what other people are playing, what the listeners are playing, or the
Took the
watchers are
words right out of
playing.
my mouth. Yeah, I
Oh,
was
there we
about to
go.
say,
Nice.
yeah, if y'all have been playing anything and there's games you think we should get our hands on and try out for ourselves, like please write in and let us know. And if you go and try any of the games that we recommended, let us know what you think because I think for me, right, Moonstone Island, Punch Club 2, Eternites, I think all look really good, and I really had a good time futzing around with them. Eternites was one where I didn't finish the demo because I got to like what felt like a stopping point, and I was like, I'm so into this, I don't want to play it anymore because I want to just experience it,
Play the full game. Yeah.
So yeah, like I'm like I got like 30, maybe 40 minutes in or whatever, and was like, yeah, cool, I'm good. Like, and I'm sure I'm probably near the end of the demo. I doubt it's longer than an hour, but I was like, I'm cool. You sold me. So yeah, definitely let us know. And if you do want to write in and let us know what you thought about those or any other of the things we talk about on this show, remember, there's a bunch of ways you could do that. Just like our Patreon producers did for the month of June. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valens, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Sobi, Snackago, Ty the Dude, and Waka Hula. If you want to get involved just like they did and write into the show, you can hit us up at flipscreen.games where you'll find links to our Patreon. You can get the show early. You can get all kinds of other good perks and goodies and show your support for the show. But of course, if you just want to write in and be a part of the show, there's a bunch of ways you can do that for free. You can hit us up on Discord where the conversation keeps rolling between episodes. You can write into us questions at flipscreen.games via email, or you can just go comment on the YouTube video. However you get in touch or get involved. We thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Flip Screen Games. Oh, I'm sorry, not of the Flip Screen Games podcast, of the Steam Deck
Close.
podcast. If you want to go check out our sister shows, like the Flip Screen Games podcast or Nintendo Noise, guess what? Flipscreen.games. That's the link. There you go. You're fucking you're gravy, baby. So we're gonna jump into the question block. We got a bunch of good ones this week. This first one comes from Team Linux over on the Discord, who wrote in and said, "What do you think it will take to push most people away from thinking they need a Windows machine to play the games they want?" I think this is a good question.
I think it's. Oh, go on.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's going to take making Linux not look like Linux in the same way that the Steam Deck does, making it look like a console OS.
Yep.
So they think they're just playing on a console. They're not playing on a PC or I also think that's the issue with a lot of people for PCs as well. It's like, oh, I've got all these launchers and stuff. If you do it like the Steam Deck has, where it's just you have your menu of games, you click on those games, and they either do or don't work, right? I think that's how you do it. I don't think that people really care about what they're playing. I know that there's going to be people that will think this, or people that may have had conversations with people like, oh, Linux, I'm not going to touch it, or people who are like, oh, I'm never going to touch Mac OS. But I think if you don't tell them, most people don't care.
No,
they as long as it's a familiar system that runs their games, they don't give a shit.
I'm totally with you. I think it's definitely a minority of users that are like platform warriors for OSs in the way that
Yeah,
people are for like Xbox or PlayStation or whatever, because
of course.
Windows is really the only game in town. Like Linux, obviously Team Linux writing in here, right? I'm sure you're using Linux. But it's a minority, right? It's a fraction of the people that play games on a PC. So I think in terms of like what's gonna get people away from that, I mean, I think it's when there's a viable alternative that isn't niche, right? And I
Yeah.
think we've talked a lot about how SteamOS 3.5, like that's supposed to have the proper, like full launcher release where you can install it on any machine. I think that'll go a long way if Valve markets it well and supports it well and continues to bring functionality to it that makes it a more viable competitor to Windows. Because I think one of the things that we've talked about on this show, right, is like stuff like Proton, like creating that compatibility layer. I think is a huge thing. If they can replicate that and make it where like stuff that natively runs on Windows runs on SteamOS with a compatibility layer, and you don't need to go through extra song and dance. You don't
Hmm.
need to put the onus on developers, whether that's of games or launchers or like things that aren't games, like stuff like the Adobe Suite or whatever, right? Other tools that you or like OBS or whatever. If you can do that yourself, right, and like not have it be on Adobe to be like, let's make a Linux version, like you can
Hmm.
just run the Windows version. I think that'll go a long way in making it a viable alternative for the tinkerers. And then as the
Yeah.
tinkerers get into it, the casuals get into it.
Yeah.
But I think the other bigger factor that we're not even talking about here yet is if you're a listener of the Flip Screen Games podcast a couple weeks ago, Apple had their event where they revealed their new VR headset and everything. And at that event, they had, of course, Hideo Kojima come out and talk about the new initiative they have and the new software tools they created that make it easier to port games to Mac, and that they're trying to make Mac a bigger destination for PC gaming. And I think that is actually probably the bigger thing, because I think it'll probably take years for SteamOS to become a viable alternative to Windows or Apple, if it becomes one at all, because it might not. It might stay a niche thing that is just for like hardcore PC gamers, and that's okay. But if you're talking about what you are saying here, where they think we're people who are like, I want to get into PC games, so Windows is the de facto choice.
Yeah.
I think Apple making a significant play in that space is going to go a long way in making it more of a question and less of
Yeah.
a, you want to play on PC, you get Windows.
I also think, just one final point on this, I'm not sure people think they need a Windows machine to play the games they want. I think that for other systems to play the games they want, there's a lot of jumping through hoops that you don't need to do on Windows. If you only want to play Overwatch, you want to play Diablo, or you want to play things like Call of Duty or anything that has an anti-cheat that doesn't work on Linux, then you do need a Windows machine, right? I'm sure that there's someone's going to in the comments say, well, no, because if you download this and do this and go into the console, you type a million things, but like people don't want to do
Nobody
that.
wants to do that, though.
They just want to download it and play it the way they expect. And I think that's what people don't, why are consoles so popular when PCs are so, are so much more powerful? It's because you buy a console, you plug it into the wall, you turn it on and it works. There is no tinkering. There is no, oh no, my OS is broken, so I have to reinstall it. Yeah, you get more out of it, but there's a lot more work that goes into it. People don't want work. They want to plug it in, they want it to work. And that's,
Right.
when you talk about even just the jump to PC, I think even the jump from PC to Linux in its current state is that it's okay, cool. I have to tinker, I have to do
It's
this. Or
yet
whatever.
another hoop, right? And
Exactly. Yeah.
you make the point of like you get more out of it, but I think that's in the eye of the beholder, right? Because like if you like tinkering, if you
Mhm.
like playing with stuff, or you don't mind doing that stuff, then yeah, maybe you could arguably get more out of it. But I would argue that there are a lot of people who feel that they get less out of it, because the point of playing video games is to relax and enjoy a piece of art and whatever.
I
It's
mean,
not. No. I'm with you. I get what you're saying.
go
I'm
on.
just saying, like, I think to strengthen your point, right? It's the idea of like, if you're somebody who doesn't want to do that legwork, it's going to dissuade you from playing video games,
Yeah.
because
True, yeah.
we've talked about like the quality of life changes that came with like the the new gen, current gen, whatever the hell we're calling them now. And I think those are things that like some hardcore players like don't necessarily like. We don't always appreciate the forest for the trees when it comes to some of those features, right? Where it's like quick resume, right, for example, is something that like the ability to sit down and just pick the game back up makes you more willing to sit down and play, or to
Yeah.
like juggle between multiple games or whatever, right? Um, and I feel like that is the thing, is when there is an alternative to Windows that is as simple, then people will switch. Then people
Yeah.
will buy in. But as long as, to your point, that there is yet another hoop, right, to go through it, they're just, a lot of folks are not going to do that. And you can't make decisions like, if you want to make mass market shifts based on the hardcore or the niche, right? Because we're always going to go the extra mile.
I also think that the PC to console hoop makes more sense to people, because you get to have more control over the graphics and the performance, and you can have higher frame rates. You can have 1440p. You can play however you want, plug whatever you want, and play with whatever you want. Linux does all of that, but it's a little bit harder to do. And I think like there's you're jumping through the same size hoop for less return on investment.
Yeah,
that's what I think about it. I mean, this is, again, someone's probably going to say that I'm wrong, and I've actually very much enjoyed using Linux, and I've enjoyed using desktop mode, and I've enjoyed what I've been capable of doing. But it does mean that sometimes I want to play a game and I have to jump through a bajillion hoops to get it to work, and that's fine.
I would happily switch to Linux if SteamOS gets to the point where it is as user-friendly, because I really like using Linux. It's literally the matter of compatibility. There's a lot of software I rely on to do my work that does not run on Linux. That is the primary reason I will not switch over to Linux.
Mm-hmm.
If that gets resolved, I'll happily join that crew. All right, so we're going to close it out with this question from John Yu over on the Discord, who wrote in and said, why do you think Microsoft has not pushed some sort of Xbox OS? I know there was the prototype handheld interface, but surely they could make a play for the handheld market with the Ally/Aya Neo, etc., and possibly even the deck itself, and be a great platform for Game Pass, especially since they have decades of experience with a controller interface on the Xbox. I think this is a multifaceted question, John Yu, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson. So I think there's a few reasons why you'll never see Xbox do that. The starter is that Xbox already owns, or I'm sorry, not Xbox, Microsoft, right, already owns Windows. So the idea of making a competing OS, right, that like runs on PC just doesn't make any sense, right? Like, it doesn't make sense to have a different SKU for gaming. And when you talk about the handheld side of things, right, then you're talking about I think comes back to a broader question of why doesn't Microsoft have a mobile OS, right? Why, as one of the de facto OS creators, do they not own their own proprietary mobile OS? And that's because they did, and it failed. Way back in the early I guess it was the mid to late aughts, right? It was in the early era of smartphones. One of the original competitors to the iPhone was the Windows Phone. And then they also had the Zune, right? And like both of those were there. And then there was the Surface, right, which is still around to some degree. And they had these attempts at like, let's do physical hardware, let's enter into the mobile OS space. We'll have an OS that works like Windows and blah blah blah. And it just didn't pan out, right? Like when you get down to it, Microsoft has historically not been as successful in developing hardware as software, right? So again, like when you come back to like, well, okay, make an Xbox OS and put it on these handheld PCs, put it on this, put it on that. That's why they're working on the handheld Windows mode that we talked about several episodes ago now, right? And you can see it at use on the Ally. The ROG Ally takes advantage of it, right? So I think if anything, that'll be the future of that, is them working on the handheld version of
Does
Windows.
the Ally use the handheld version of Windows? I'm pretty sure the Ally
I believe it does, right?
Well, I thought it uses full Windows, and then it just has like its own little Ally menu. If we're talking
about the
version of Windows, it was the one that was made for the Next Fest or the Hacker Fest or whatever, where Microsoft internally, some people worked on getting it to work. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So it doesn't exist yet, but that would be the play, right? Because otherwise,
that would be the play.
For everything you've said, make Windows, because if it's a handheld PC and you're calling it Xbox OS, when you go to look for Gears 3, for example, you're like, where the fuck's Gears 3? I'm playing on an Xbox, but actually it's a handheld PC. I think that's probably a problem as well.
Yeah, and I think if you go that route, right, like ideally you can just continue to propagate the OS that you already own, right, and not have to have multiple SKUs that you're supporting, and I think it's just complicated, right, to think of like how do you make an Xbox specific OS where rather than how do we make an Xbox layer in Windows? How do we make Xbox more a part of Windows?
Yeah.
And you see that, right? In Windows 10 and 11, there's the Xbox app built in when you download it. You know, it's inherently part of gaming on PC now. And I think that's the future, is going to be kind of making the Xbox brand probably more all-encompassing of like Windows gaming.
And I also think a third party like ROG Ally, INO, whatever, running Xbox OS is confusing for them because they own Xbox. Xbox this is an Xbox. It has an Xbox OS, not this is an Xbox. But also technically the ROG Ally is also an Xbox. Like it's not Android in the way that Windows is Windows, right? Where it can just run on anything. An Xbox is an Xbox. There's just, like some of the features are a part of Windows.
Like, I feel like the inroad they want you to have with Xbox is using the Game Pass app or the Xbox app, not you have the Xbox OS on a device that isn't the Xbox. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I mean, the idea that they could partner for a handheld or something like that, I don't think is out of the question. I think it's just like, I don't think it's going to take that kind of shape. Especially where it's like an OS that then they go and like let other third parties license out or whatever. I just don't see that.
Yeah.
But maybe a companion device at some point could make sense. Because we talked about that stick that they were working on that got canceled, right? And they're, hopefully going to figure out an alternative for that. And I think that's the use of the Xbox OS as it exists, is on Xbox. Good question, though. I like these OS questions. I think it's an interesting one, and it's going to be interesting to see like what 3.5 does, and if it ends up being as much of a shakeup as we think it could be. But we'll have to see. We'll keep it tuned. You guys keep it tuned here, and we'll keep you abreast on everything that's going on. So remember, write in with your thoughts on Steam Next Fest or any of the other stuff we talked about this week. Steve will be back next week, and he will, of course, hopefully have some updates for us on the games that he played during Steam Next Fest, as well as some of his thoughts on his time with The Last of Us Part 1 post-patch. So we got a lot of good stuff for you next week. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. Remember, if you want to write in and you want to show your support, however you choose to do so, flipscreen.games is the website. Go and click on some stuff. It helps us out a lot. We appreciate you very much. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Max. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Goodbye.